Ruth, chapter 1. Joshua judges Ruth, by the way. Because I've forgotten where it was too. Yeah, I knew all the books of the Bible. Somebody taught me that. I could sing them one time. Probably not so well, but I could sing them. There is a little heading here at the beginning, and so that will help kind of set the stage. There's not a lot of historical markers, but this is sufficient to get us kind of started. Verse 1 says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. All right, so let's do just a little bit of work there. The word, interesting. The word here in the Hebrew, it means to judge or to pronounce a sentence either for or against. Of course, by implication, it can mean to vindicate or to punish. By extension, then, if that's what the word means, it implies to be able to govern, either passively or to litigate, either literally or figuratively. It can carry the idea of revenge, or it can be this, judge so that someone is condemned. That's what the word means. It means contend, defend, or execute judgment. To be a judge. It can also even include the idea of reason or rule. There are going to be differences. I think the King James reads a little bit different. Now it came to pass when the judges ruled, I believe, is the King James. So the NIV is very similar to that. There's a footnote that indicates traditionally when they judged. And that's the essence of the word itself. But it's a marker. It seems to imply the period of the judges. So if that is the historical place, most people believe that that's the place that we're talking about, then that helps us. Now, let's just get a quick remembrance of the flavor of the judges. What was the pattern? There's a very repeated pattern in the book of Judges. And you could put it in 3 parts if you wanted to, or maybe 4. What was the pattern? Blessing. Okay, the Lord takes care of you. The Lord takes care of you. Oh, we rebel. We worship idols. We disobey God. God gives you over to, usually a nation that is ruling and oppressing them, or there is some kind of famine or disease, pestilence, locusts could be in that scene. Those are all forms of that kind of thing. And then finally, there is a judge that is brought in at the end. Gideon is a judge, and they were being oppressed by the Midianites. And Gideon comes in, even though there's been this reasonably long period of oppression. God calls him. He delivers Israel. And but the reason they were in that position is because they had rebelled against God. Well, Gideon rescues them, and no sooner than Gideon has died out, what happens? As a matter of fact, they start worshiping this little thing that he erected, which wasn't an idol per se, but they started worshiping it because Gideon built it. And anyhow, it's just tragic. So that's sort of the cycle of the judges, but it's not an overnight cycle. This does not happen overnight. People don't rebel overnight. God doesn't give them over to oppression and famine overnight, but these are generally long periods of time. You know, sometimes their oppression is 18 years. Sometimes it might be 40 years, whatever. The point is, there's varying time frames during the period of the judges that the oppression of the land might have been going on. Now, during the oppression of the land, it is not uncommon to see a period of famine. It is one of the things that God used. So if this is a period-based comment where the writer is indicating we are in, or this account came out of the period of the judges, then that helps to explain why there is a famine in the land. This is not accidental. God does not. He's the one that causes the rain. So a famine in his land does not happen unless he intends for it to happen. Okay? So this is a marker and perhaps at the same time an explanation as to why this particular famine is happening. And there's just so much in the Judges where you've got this, that they were just stuck in a sin-sick cycle. Okay? That's what it boils down to. They just, one generation sins, and then the next generation sins, and then God sends them a deliverer. And another generation sins, and it's just over and over and over. And the entire book of Judges is just constant people rising up and killing, and just men do what they want to do. The end of the book is horrible. The woman is cut up into 12 pieces, I believe, and sent throughout the land after she had been raped and abused, and just, I mean, it's just awful. And that's the last chapter. And then there's this whole thing with these, because they had killed so many people from Benjamin, this weird encounter of them taking wives for themselves. It's just a bad book of behavior. It's not a bad thing on God. It's just a bad human behavior. So there is a famine. It is during the period of the Judges. There is a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons. And he went to live a while in the land of Moab. Okay. Let's just try to reason here what's happening. Let's reason what's happening, and then think about what God has said maybe about some of this. Before we move any further, I want to deal with this thought or this question. Why is this man moving to Moab? Yes, he is moving because of the famine. So he is moving to do what related to his family? What's he trying to do? He's trying to take care of them. He's trying to preserve them. He's got a wife and 2 boys. We don't know how old they are, but they're old enough to travel and go with him. They are going because obviously he feels like there is some way in which the circumstance, as it is compared to where he is, would be some way advantageous. Now, we have seen famine move people before, right? who moved to Egypt because of a famine. And when Jacob went to a famine, Jacob went to a famine. When he went to Egypt, do you remember what God said in his ear right before he left? He said, go. It's okay. I'll go with you. And your own son, Joseph, will close your eyes when you go there and die. And he gets there, and I think that he has 17 or 37. I can't remember. He's got a long time that he lives in Egypt yet. I think it's 17 years.
You go all the way back. Abraham went in Genesis 12. That's what he goes to Egypt because of a famine in Genesis 12.
Famine is just it's a relocate. Okay. It forces you to ask that question. How much longer are we going to stay here with nothing growing? Okay. That was the question to the boys, to their dad, right? Jacob was refusing. Remember when they got back and they weren't, Jacob said, you ain't taking Benjamin down there. And the boys said, well, okay, we'll stay here. And they did until they ate everything in the house. And then they come over here and they're like, we are starving to death. And Jacob said, y'all ain't going to Egypt.
Hunger will make you pack up and go.
Hunger will chase his mind. All right, if it must be, Jacob said, take your brother, take these provisions, go to Egypt, get food before we die. All right, so all I'm trying to say is that most of us sitting in this room hadn't known hunger to maybe to that extent. And so there is obviously something that is motivating. And we're told that Elimelech is moving his wife and his two sons. Now, I believe based on the fact that it is introduced that the famine is going on, it is just not unreasonable to understand that he is moving because of the famine. Now, so he's not just like, I wonder what's going on over there in Moab. He's not like that, okay? He's not like, oh man, I hope my sons can go over here and be influenced by Moab. But famine will make you do some things maybe that you wouldn't ordinarily do. Now, let's talk about Moab, because where is he going? And let's think about Moab. First and foremost, who is Moab? Mike's been talking about this Psalm on his class on Sunday morning. Okay, Lot has, remember, he has two offspring with his own daughters, Ammon and Moab. Ammon and Moab. So they are descendants of Lot. That's who we're talking about. Cousins to Abraham and his family. Ruth is going to come from the line of Lot. Okay? Put that in your mind. She is what we would call a Gentile. Go ahead, Frank.
Them two sons was completely different, wasn't it?
Ammon and Moab, sure. They started two nations. That's right.
They were two different.
Sure. Two different groups.
They were different.
Just as different as Jacob and Esau were. Yep. And Isaac and Ishmael. Yep. That's right. Brothers in some way, but different. And two nations come from those children. All right. So Ruth comes from Lot. Now, what should the relationship be? We have to ask the question, what should the relationship be between Israel and Moab? What do you think?
Well, should be friends or relatives.
Okay. Well, but there are some specific things that are spoken in Numbers and family line could be traced back to Genesis to find where those families come from. Let's look at Numbers 22 for just a minute. Numbers 22. Now there's something that happens as the people are on their way to the land of promise. In Numbers 22, and Scott alluded to this shortly ago, Balaam calls for the Moabites to be able to help Israel to stumble. That's what happens. Balaam is the prophet, and there are several messages here where he is interacting with the king Balak, who is the king of Moab. But I want you to go over to chapter 25 at the end of all of these speeches, where Balaam really does say what God tells him to. But after that happens, after he says what God tells him to, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women who invited them to sacrifice to their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor. And the Lord turns against him. And on this particular day, 24,000 people die. At the end there of verse 9. 24,000 people. Balaam and Moab are the ones who are working in connection to make this happen. Now, go back to Deuteronomy chapter 23. Now, this is after the Numbers incident, okay? Obviously, because he's telling them and reminding them here. In Deuteronomy 23, there is this reference talking about people who are going to be excluded from the assembly or the congregation. Verse 2, no one born of a forbidden marriage, nor any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. So it had to be like beyond that. No Ammonite, Ammon, or Moabite, Moab, or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. Well, why? Look carefully at how Moses remembered. This is reflecting back to Numbers 22. Numbers 22 has already happened. They've already had the incident with the Baal of Peor, and they have already happened in Numbers 31. They go and take vengeance on Moab. Anyhow, no Ammonite. Okay, for they did not come with bread and water. That's Ammon. On your way when you came out of Egypt, and they hired Balaam. They hired Balaam, son of Beor, in Aram to pronounce a curse on you. However, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but turn the curse into blessing because of the Lord your God. He loves you. Don't seek a treaty of friendship with him as long as you live. All right. So what maybe should the disposition, it is it seems that Moab should not be thought of as a friendly nation to be with. Go ahead, Wendy.
I don't remember where it was, but I remember the time that I paid particular attention to it. The place where God lists those nations, that they are not going to marry with.
Yes, that's chapter 7.
He doesn't mention there.
No, he doesn't.
Moab.
He
or
doesn't.
Ammon.
Yep, he doesn't. That is true. Look back at chapter 7. It is, chapter 7, beginning. You're exactly right. This is the place I was taking this, and that it is true. But this is an interesting outcome, okay? Because in chapter 7, what you find, this is at the beginning of that. I'll come right back to you. And you can see, we'll read that. When the Lord your God brings you, let's start at verse 1, and you are entering to possess these nations, he's going to drive out before you the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And this is to Wendell's comment. 7 nations. It's specific, larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them, you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them. Show them no mercy. Go ahead. So his point is that Moab is not listed there. Go ahead.
While they're not listed, as I recall, though, during the time of Nehemiah,
Yep,
either Nehemiah or
it is.
where they are beginning to intermarry with the people, and perhaps children were speaking.
Yes, they weren't even speaking the native language.
It seems like there that he does include the Moabites and Ammonites there, but earlier in Deuteronomy, they're not excluded, but by Nehemiah's time, he begins to exclude them.
Well, I think in Nehemiah that he is excluding them. Let's go to it.
That's
And,
what I mean.
he was
I mean, he's including them that they cannot marry.
correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. That is correct. Yeah. Nehemiah, see, is sort of the interpreter. He's a helper, because Wendell's point is right. When you come back, Nehemiah is after the captivity period, okay? And the way Nehemiah reads the law and he interprets it, and of course the Spirit of God is with him. Him and Ezra both are sent back, Zechariah, and they are understanding the law with the people, and they exclude Moabites for that very reason. Go ahead.
Now, back in Deuteronomy 23,
Yes.
it says that is not a positive eternal statement.
No,
It
it is
is
not.
modified by saying to the 10th.
even to the 10th generation.
That's right.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, the way that God says it, it doesn't sound like it will never happen. It says it won't happen until like the 10th generation, and then they are considered to be,
And it does.
it does.
You bring it up in Nehemiah, and that probably was past the 10th generation.
It may have been, but either way, for sure, Nehemiah is excluding them. He is not permitting them. So all I'm trying to say is that there is, when you have somebody like this, where he is going out of Israel and into Moab. Again, this is a period of the judges. And if Elimelech is dealing with this up and down attitude of the dispensation of the judges, then he is maybe thinking that he will do himself better to go to Moab. But it does not seem to me that there is just all out support from the law for him to do that, But God is going to work through this. And It is an interesting thing. So circle Moab there in your text. And you should mark these places in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 3 following. That's before, okay? But the history happens in Numbers 25. That's where you've got the history, and that history is what changes or qualifies the message in 23. So that because of the incident at Peor, it helps us understand why Moses is saying that. And God gives us a clear vision into what's going on there. So these are descendants of Lot. Ruth comes from Lot. She is a Moabitess. She is flatly a Gentile.
The genealogies, though, were always considered from the man's side, weren't they?
Mhm.
So even, I mean, like Judah, even Judah marrying a Gentile, he's still Jewish,
Absolutely.
which is very different from today, because
Correct.
today,
Correct.
among the Jews, I believe today don't they can't even go
Can't
from
from
the
the
black
other side, correct.
side.
Yeah.
Correct. It's a total transition.
Yeah, that's interesting
Different
that
things.
it has changed. Yeah,
And so the Jewish use of the word, of the terminology to the 10th generation is actually in a lot of cases meant to be forever. That is not a literal 10th generation. It is an actual promotion of the idea of forever, a completed, for permanent. So when you go back and read that in Deuteronomy 23, you gotta take, like, so verse 2, no one of illegitimate birth shall enter the assembly of the Lord, none of his descendants, even to the 10th generation. They literally mean that is a permanent
feature.
thing, permanent feature, correct?
Mhm.
So then no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord, none of their descendants even to the 10th generation. So
Yeah.
my point to that is what Wendell's saying is very important to consider, because Ruth in her own standing would not have been allowed to be a part of, quote, the assembly.
Right.
But it's because of the kinsman redeemer aspect of Boaz that makes her, like, it's like a grafting in.
Yeah.
It's a Romans 9, 10, and 11 situation. It's a
Yeah.
grafting
Right.
in of the person
Right.
who is technically by the law not allowed,
Correct.
is now allowed fully, not just partially, but fully allowed because of their.
And if that is the application that you're talking about, that there is a counting only from the man's side, then when she is married to Boaz, then she is going to be, and that's just a marvelous,
Well,
there's so much to that picture that I'm just wrestling to even get my head around.
If you can't see the beauty of God's plan for all men everywhere to be saved in that, then you miss the whole thing, because she's included in, through her son that she has with
Correct.
Boaz, she's included in the genealogy of Jesus.
Correct.
And that's not by accident.
You did, with that permanency, you'd have some problems with when you get to the Jews because of David.
Yes,
Correct.
that's right.
There's got to be some grafting done.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And that same thing is true too, because Boaz, who she is going to meet,
yes.
he is a son of Rahab ultimately. That's through whom Boaz comes. So whoever marries Rahab,
Exactly. That's right.
it's the same kind of picture where you've got a male. Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, I read one time, and fellow was completely wrong on this. Where it said to the 10th generation, and he tried to point out that from Rahab to David was 10 generations. So therefore, he said David was able to say, I was glad when
Right.
said to me, let's go to the house of the Lord. He forgot about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was gonna say he missed one.
Yeah.
He missed one.
Missed a big one.
Yeah.
You gotta put some ifs in there someplace.
Yeah. He missed Ruth.
Yes. So this is just a great, and these are two accounts, where you've got this, you've got this Gentile from Jericho, and her line gets involved into the story as well because she is in the line of Boaz. And Ruth now is from Moab, and they should not be having connection because of their disobedience and the relationship that now Israel is supposed to have toward them. And they have this awful God. I mean, the God of Moab is the one that enticed all the Israelites to sin sexually, and they did. And 24,000 of them died as a result of a plague in Numbers chapter 25 or wherever it is. So it's a bad thing. But out of that, God is able, because he is, just like Scott was talking about, he is a reconciler. He is someone that can bring someone to him. He can find a way to do that. And that is just the outset of this story. And I think that's not only is this story going to be introduced because of the lineage of the Lord, it also shows God's love for the Gentiles, and it also shows a complete opposite picture. It is the best home situation you can see in the book of, and the period of the Judges. You know, what other book, what other ruler, even good rulers in the book of Judges are not as good as what you would want them to be. This woman is good, and Boaz treats her very sweetly and kindly, and accepts not only her, but her mother-in-law too, and takes the whole of them together. It's just a contrast picture to the behavior and the lives of the people during the period of the Judges. And so it is all of these things wrapped up into 4 chapters. And there are beautiful pictures, especially this Redeemer that we'll get to.
I think Boaz knew the story that was behind Ruth and Naomi.
Well, he would have known his own story. I mean, his with Rahab being in his family, he would have known how that came about and who she ended up marrying and how she got included in the people of Israel. And there were certain things that people would have to do. And when people were taken captive from surrounding nations, and when the Lord permitted, for example, the men to take women, those women had to be kept in their home for 30 days. They mourned for their families. They washed their clothes. They did all these various things. I forgot, shaved their head. There's several steps in order for them. And then God says, then they have to be following the law, just like anybody else. So if a foreigner comes in and they are in the house of Israel, they have to behave like Israel. They got to sound like Israel. They got to look like Israel. They can't come in looking like this woman could not have drug in her God, this Baal Peor or any other God in. And that's why she is going to be so favored when she says over here in chapter 1, look, my God will be your God. I'm good with this. I understand what the shift needs to be.
Well, just to bring thought full circle. So Rahab is the mother of Boaz.
Correct.
Okay. Her husband is Salmon, S-A-L-M-O-N.
Salmon, yes.
If you go back and look, that's mentioned at the end of Ruth 4. It's mentioned in 1 Chronicles 2.
Correct.
And in 1 Chronicles 2 specifically, Salmon is referred to as the son of Nashon, who is the leader of the sons of Judah.
Right.
So for Rahab, she married a son of a leader of the tribe of Judah.
Right.
You can't get much more folded in.
No. Those leaders in Numbers, when they are dividing the camp and when they sleep and when they are called, there's a trumpet call for the leaders. And all the leaders of the heads of each of those tribes will come, and there's 12 of them. And he's referring to that very spot. But those people are also responsible for when the trumpet call is issued and they are breaking camp and leaving. They're responsible for assembling their people. They're also responsible to be assembling them for war. If that was the case, if they were going out, they would be the leader in those respects. So you're talking about somebody that is great in the sight of the people. And I think that those leaders were also who were the original 12 spies. They were leaders of the tribes. So Rahab is what Scott is saying, is tied in to a leader's family in that way.
There's the restoration aspect of God again, because she's a harlot when we
Yes.
meet her. She's now married to the son of the leader
Right.
of the tribe of Judah.
Yep. No small coincidence. Go ahead, Wendell.
No, I didn't.
Okay. So this is great background. Elimelech, his name means something like my king is my God, or God is king. It's a very attractive name. His wife's name is Naomi, and her name is pleasant, or maybe the idea of my delight. That's a good name. Names are not coincidental. Now, contrast that to Mahlon, Mahan, and his name means sick. And Kilion, his name means pining, like crying out, or, in some way distressed. And you'll see that those names really do apply to the name's sake. And the Lord is just able to accomplish those things. Anyhow, they are leaving to the land of Moab. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem. Ephrath is the old name of Bethlehem, and it's just an explanation of that connection there to Bethlehem of Judah. They go to Moab and live there. Verse 3, now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they lived there about 10 years, now we get a marker. We don't get that marker before Elimelech dies, so we don't really know what the duration was. But around the 10-year mark, both of the boys die. And Naomi is left without her 2 sons and her husband. That is really a tough spot to find yourself. There have been many of you that have experienced similar circumstances, and you're going to see that she is going to be so marked by this happening that she nearly changes her name at the end of the chapter, because she's going to think about herself in relation to her suffering and to the hand of the Lord being upon her. But that's the circumstance, and that's what we have as far as the introduction. Here's what happened. A family, Elimelech and his wife and two sons move off, probably chasing away the effects of the famine. And they go to Moab, and the husband dies, and the sons die. So what do you make of that? Sad story. I mean, this is a bad day. It would be bad enough if your husband died, but then to have two sons to additionally die, and that's it. There are no other children that are mentioned. So if there are other children, we don't know that.
Just purely, yeah,
Alone.
alone.
Yep.
Without any support and money. That was before Social Security.
A few days before Social Security. You're exactly right.
That was a very vulnerable.
He said it was a few days before Social Security. Yeah. Yeah.
You see that when you read the whole, when you get over to the end of the 4th chapter, you can see the hand of God working in that. So,
You can.
Yeah.
For sure. Go ahead, Mom.
It wasn't a long period of time. I mean, she lost her husband and then within 10 years.
Bang.
Bang, bang. I mean, it appears to me they both died within a short period of time, both the sons.
Mhm.
So, 10 years is not a long time,
No.
only to a child.
Yes. Right. And if you have lost a husband as they first come over, we're not told that. I mean, we just don't know what the marker is. But
And what that would do to a Jewish woman, like culturally,
Yep.
culturally, to be a female who has lost the husband and lost both boys.
Yep.
She is, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but she's as low on the totem pole as you could possibly get.
Right. There's an identity in connection to your men.
And the only thing lower would be to have no children at all,
Right.
which is what you see when you get over into the Gospels. You start talking about John the Baptist, you start talking about that situation. She was barren, and that's as low as you could possibly be as a female in that culture.
Yeah.
The one step above that is to be a female with no husband and no sons.
Yeah.
And that's, so that, I mean, the bitterness is understandable from the human aspect of it, because now she realizes the money's gone. Culturally, she's going to be looked down upon, and there really, truly is no hope for anything positive to come. So that's why she's telling the girls, go back where you're from. You don't want to be anywhere around me.
There are two occasions, maybe more, but Elisha comes to mind. You know, when he helped and the Lord gave the lady that was housing him, gave her a son, and then a few years after that, she was the only son that she had. He was the only son that she had, and he died. And Elisha felt bad for her, and he went and laid across the boy, remember, and prayed for that boy and restored the boy's life. And that same spirit is exemplified by the Lord. Our Lord wasn't moved to compassion by everybody that called him, but when he saw the widow going out in Luke 7 at Nain, and she was a widow, and he was the only son of her mother. And he restored his life because he felt compassion toward that. In other words, it just suggests that those kind of circumstances would generally generate somebody to think, that's bad times. So that's what she's in. And that's where we'll pick up next week. Thanks, everybody.